Blake Daniels never thought he'd be the kind of man to be caught off guard. He had mastered everything in life: business deals, jet-setting across the globe, and fleeting encounters that never asked for more than a night. He controlled his empire, his emotions, and above all, his relationships. Everything was a transaction, except for that night with Lily Harris. Their encounter, electric and effortless, was supposed to be just another story in Blake's repertoire of casual flings. But as Blake leaned back in his penthouse chair, staring out at the city he owned, his phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. The message from Lily was short, matter-of-fact, but it carried a weight that Blake couldn't ignore. "Blake, I'm pregnant." He had always been able to control everything, except this. What does a man like Blake Daniels do when the world he's meticulously built begins to crack under the weight of a single unexpected message? And what happens when the woman he thought was just a fling suddenly becomes the center of his universe? Lily Harris wasn't the type of woman to chase a billionaire, much less get caught up in a one-night affair with one. She was independent, driven by her passion for her career, with dreams of her own that didn't include falling into a billionaire's orbit. But Blake was magnetic, his presence impossible to ignore, and for a night, they shared something that felt different from anything Lily had ever experienced. She had walked away thinking it would remain just that, a fleeting moment in time. But when she discovered she was pregnant, everything changed. What was supposed to be just a moment in her life became a defining point, one that would test her strength, her independence, and her belief in love. The man she had once seen as untouchable, a world away from her own, was now the father of her child. Blake's world, one of high-end parties and expensive possessions, was about to collide with the messy, unpredictable reality of fatherhood, and it was a collision neither of them saw coming. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from, so YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. When the message from Lily appeared on his phone, Blake had been momentarily paralyzed. His mind raced, trying to process the words. "Blake, I'm pregnant." The words seemed absurd to him, a strange glitch in the perfect life he had carefully curated. He stared at his phone, a cold sense of disbelief settling over him. His empire, his power, his control over every aspect of his life. How could any of it be real if something as inconvenient as a child was about to upend it all? He tried to reason with himself, convincing himself that it was just a mistake. Maybe Lily was confused. Maybe she was just being dramatic. It couldn't be real, not in his world. He rubbed his temples, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, his penthouse offering a view of the city he had conquered. But the view, the high-rise buildings, the bustling streets below, all of it suddenly felt irrelevant. What mattered now? The thought of fatherhood, of responsibility. Those words sounded alien in his mind. He was Blake Daniels. He didn't do complications. He didn't do anything that didn't fit into the neat, orderly life he had built. After a long moment of indecision, Blake tapped out a response, his fingers stiff as he typed, "We'll handle this. I'll take care of it, don't worry." His heart raced as he hit send, but even he knew it was just a temporary solution. He wasn't ready to be a father. Hell, he didn't even know what that meant. But Blake Daniels always fixed problems, and this would be no different. He called his assistant and instructed her to arrange a meeting with a lawyer, convinced that the best way to handle the situation was through money. A financial agreement, a quick settlement, and it would all go away. He wasn't one to waste time on emotional messes. He had a business to run after all. But when Lily's reply came, it wasn't what he expected. "Blake, I don't need your money. I need you to be a father, not just a checkbook. If you're going to be involved, I need more than just your signature on a contract. I need your heart. I need your presence." Blake sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't want him to fix this with money. She wanted him to step up in a way he never had, to be a part of something beyond his empire. It was too much. He couldn't do it. He didn't know how to. His world, so meticulously controlled, had no place for vulnerability, for emotional ties. The business meetings, the parties, the constant drive to climb higher, those were the things that filled his life. He didn't know how to be present for something as raw and complicated as a child. And yet, Lily's words lingered, the challenge in her tone gnawing at him. Could he ignore this? Could he walk away from the responsibility of fatherhood? But that was what he wanted, wasn't it? To keep his distance, to remain detached, to continue living in the bubble he'd worked so hard to build. He had no time for this. Blake's reluctance, his coldness, drove a wedge between them. Lily, though shaken, stood firm. She wouldn't settle for a relationship based on transactions. She deserved more than that, even if it meant doing this alone. She had always been independent, self-sufficient, and now, more than ever, she knew that she could handle this on her own. "I'll do this alone, Blake," she had said, her voice unwavering. "I don't need your money. I need you to decide if you want to be a part of this, or if you want to walk away." Blake watched as she pulled away, a part of him feeling the rift grow wider between them. But he couldn't stop the questions from creeping into his mind. Could he truly walk away? Was this just an inconvenient complication, or had something deeper been set in motion? As Lily set the course for her future, determined to face the pregnancy with strength, Blake felt the first stirrings of guilt. A guilt he couldn't quite name, but it was there, gnawing at him. The tension in the air grew thicker with each passing day. Blake had no answer for her, no real plan, only the cold certainty that his life would continue on its fast, lucrative track. But deep inside, something was shifting. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, Blake Daniels was about to face the one thing he never planned for: the consequences of being human. The weeks dragged on, and with each passing day, Blake found himself tangled in a web of conflicting emotions. His world, one of sleek suits, boardrooms, and private jets, had slowly begun to shift, bending around something he hadn't prepared for: responsibility. The pregnancy had started as an inconvenient disruption, something that could be fixed with money and distance. But as the days stretched into weeks, Blake found himself doing things he never thought he would: attending doctor's appointments, standing in sterile waiting rooms, pretending to care about the sound of a heartbeat that he could barely comprehend. Lily's growing belly was a constant reminder of the one thing Blake couldn't control. He had hoped that by throwing money at the situation, it would somehow disappear. But it didn't. It was there, in the quiet moments when they sat together in the waiting room, or when Lily would rest her hand on her belly and smile softly at him, as though she could sense something he couldn't quite grasp. Blake couldn't deny that he felt a pull toward her, something he hadn't expected, something that seemed to grow with every passing week. But it wasn't love. It couldn't be. No, it was just the natural result of being in close proximity to someone for so long. That's all it was. He had no intention of getting involved emotionally. He was doing his part, wasn't he? He was here, showing up, paying for everything, attending appointments. That was more than most fathers did. But even as he rationalized it, there was a nagging discomfort that began to settle in his chest, a discomfort that only grew stronger as the days went by. He could control his empire, his wealth, his life. Why couldn't he control this? Why couldn't he just push it to the side and forget about it? He tried, he really did. But the truth was, Blake couldn't escape the inevitable. He had made a decision. He would provide for the child, give Lily financial support, but that would be the extent of his involvement. It was the only way, the only logical path forward. One evening, sitting in the back of a black SUV as it made its way through the traffic of the city, Blake found himself rehearsing the deal he would propose to Lily. He would make it clear to her that he wasn't interested in becoming a full-time father. He had a business to run, a life to live, and emotions, especially love, had no place in that equation. By the time the SUV pulled up to Lily's apartment building, Blake had convinced himself that this was the only way to make things work. He needed to protect his empire, and in doing so, he would protect her and the baby. But what was it exactly that he was protecting them from? Was it the reality of a messy, complicated life that scared him? Or was it the truth that, somewhere deep down, he feared he wasn't capable of being the man they needed? As Blake stepped into the elevator, his pulse quickened. He hadn't prepared himself for this moment, hadn't prepared himself for the vulnerability that came with opening up to someone, even just a little. But it was too late now. This was the deal he had to offer, and it was all he could give. When Lily opened the door, she greeted him with a smile, though it was faint, guarded. He could tell she was growing tired of the emotional distance he maintained, but still, she welcomed him in. They sat down on the couch, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Blake took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "Lily, I know this situation isn't ideal, but I want to do what's best for the baby. I'll provide for everything. You'll never have to worry about money. But I can't. I can't be the kind of father who's involved emotionally. I can't give you what you want." Lily's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening as she listened. She didn't interrupt, but Blake could see the shift in her demeanor. She had heard these words before, from men who thought money could solve everything. He had seen it in the boardrooms, in the deals he closed, but here, this was different. Here, no amount of wealth would ever be enough. "I don't need your money, Blake," Lily replied, her voice calm but firm. "What I need is you. I need you to be a father, not just a financial backer. A child deserves more than that." Blake's chest tightened. The words stung, though he tried to mask it. He had always prided himself on being a man who got what he wanted, who built everything from the ground up. But this was different, and it terrified him. "You can't be serious," Blake muttered, though it was clear by her steady gaze that she was. "I've offered you everything you need. What more do you want?" Lily shook her head, the frustration in her eyes undeniable. "I don't want a deal. I want a father for my child. You either step up or you don't. But don't think that throwing money at the situation will make it go away." Blake felt the weight of her words, the sharp sting of rejection. But what hurt even more was the growing realization that this wasn't just about money or business. It was about something he had spent years trying to ignore. Love. His pride was bruised, but deep down, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as in control of this situation as he thought. And the more he tried to push it away, the more he realized it was pulling him in deeper. As Lily stood up to leave the room, the silence between them felt like an insurmountable distance. He knew he had failed. The deal he thought would fix everything had backfired, and now the question remained. Could Blake Daniels face the truth that, in the end, money wasn't enough? The days bled into weeks, and Blake Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was shifting. It wasn't just the baby or the responsibility that loomed over him like an unshakable cloud. It was Lily. At first, his presence in her life had been a reluctant one, driven by a sense of obligation more than anything else. But as the days passed, Blake found himself drawn deeper into her world, as if some invisible thread had begun to tie them together. Lily's strength was undeniable. He had witnessed it in the way she carried herself through the pregnancy, independent, determined, uncomplaining. She never leaned on him for anything more than what he had already offered. She didn't ask for more money or sympathy. She simply carried on, handling the emotional and physical challenges of her pregnancy with grace that Blake couldn't quite fathom. He admired her, admired the way she navigated life, how she faced each new day without hesitation, even when the weight of their situation should have been enough to break anyone else. But not her. Lily had a quiet resilience that tugged at something in him, something Blake hadn't realized he'd been craving for years. He started to see her differently. It wasn't just the way she looked or the way she smiled when she spoke about their child. It was the way she lived, the way she didn't ask for anyone's approval and yet commanded respect effortlessly. She didn't need Blake. She didn't need anyone, but she allowed him to be a part of her life, even if only in small ways. The first sign of change came when Blake offered to accompany Lily to her next doctor's appointment. She hadn't asked, but he found himself on the phone with her, arranging the time and date. The pregnancy, once something he'd tried to ignore, had started to feel real, and Lily, in her calm, collected way, had become a person Blake found himself increasingly invested in. The hospital was quiet, the sterile white walls doing nothing to dampen the anxiety Blake had felt walking through the doors. He hated this place, the smell of antiseptic, the quiet hum of machines. It felt too intimate, too real. And yet, there he was, sitting beside Lily, his fingers subconsciously tapping against the armrest as she listened to the doctor explain the latest ultrasound results. Blake watched her as the doctor spoke, the way she nodded, taking everything in with a quiet dignity. She didn't need him here. She was handling this on her own, just like she always had. But there was a small shift in Blake's mind as he sat there, absorbing the reality of what was happening. This wasn't a business deal or a temporary arrangement. This was something real, something that couldn't be bought or controlled. Later, when the doctor left, Blake's gaze lingered on Lily. She was smiling softly, the kind of smile that spoke volumes about her inner strength. She looked so calm, so in control, and yet Blake could see the faintest shadow of exhaustion beneath her eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked before he could stop himself. Lily looked over at him, her gaze softening. "I'm fine. A little tired, but that's to be expected." Blake nodded, though the words felt inadequate. What could he say? What did he know about what she was going through? What could he offer, aside from money, that would make any difference? But as she turned back toward the window, staring out at the city beyond, Blake couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He wasn't just here because he had to be. He wanted to be. But why? Why was he starting to care in ways he couldn't explain? Why was he feeling this unexplainable pull toward her, one that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day? His thoughts were interrupted by Lily's voice. "You know, Blake," she said, her tone almost too casual, "you don't have to keep coming. You've done more than enough." Blake's jaw tightened. Was she dismissing him? Was this just another moment where he had overstepped, where his presence was unwanted? But before he could speak, she added, "I appreciate it, though. Really. I didn't expect this from you." He swallowed the words he'd been about to say. He didn't know why he was doing it either, but he wasn't going to back down now. "I'm here," Blake said simply, meeting her gaze, "and I'll keep coming. I want to be here." There it was, the first real sign of his transformation. The first time Blake had allowed himself to acknowledge the shift within him. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just walk away from this. He couldn't pretend that he didn't care. But still, there was a wall inside him, one he had built over the years, brick by brick, to protect himself from the hurt that came with opening up to others. And even as he spent more time with Lily, as he started to feel the stirrings of something deeper within him, that wall wasn't coming down easily. He wasn't ready to face the vulnerability that love brought, and he wasn't ready to admit that he was afraid of it. But with every visit, with every quiet moment he shared with Lily, that wall began to crack just a little more. And Blake knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a journey he wasn't prepared for, but one he might just have to take anyway. And so, Blake began showing up, one appointment at a time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And that was something. The hospital room was silent, except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the sound of Lily's breath, slow and steady. Blake sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling the weight of the moment, yet unable to grasp what was happening. His heart raced as he watched Lily, so strong and composed through hours of labor, her face a mixture of concentration and exhaustion. Blake had never been in a situation like this before. He had never been present for anything so raw, so real. His world had always been about control, about keeping everything within boundaries that he set. And now, here he was, watching a woman bring life into the world, and feeling his own world shift. The moment finally came. A nurse called out, her voice filled with the quiet intensity that only those who had witnessed hundreds of births could carry. And then, the room was filled with the sound of a baby's cry, a sound so pure, so small, yet so powerful, it made Blake's chest tighten. Lily, her face flushed with effort, collapsed back against the pillow, gasping for breath. Blake's eyes locked onto the tiny figure that was gently placed into the nurse's hands. For a second, everything stood still. The room, the people, the chaos, all faded away, leaving only the small life in the nurse's arms. "This is it," Blake whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. The nurse carefully placed the baby into Lily's arms. His son. Blake watched, transfixed, as Lily cradled the child to her chest. It was as if the world had shifted on its axis, and everything that had once seemed important now paled in comparison. The baby's face was still scrunched up from the shock of the world, but Blake couldn't help the overwhelming surge of emotion that filled him. This tiny, fragile human was his son. He had never felt anything like this before, nothing even close. It was as if a dam inside him had finally broken, and the flood of emotions came pouring out. Lily looked up at Blake, her face softening as she gazed at their son. "He's beautiful, Blake," she whispered, her voice filled with a tenderness Blake had never heard from her before. She looked so different now, no longer just the independent woman he had once admired from a distance, but a mother, someone who had brought a miracle into the world. Blake stepped closer, his body trembling with a mix of awe and uncertainty. He extended his hand, barely able to comprehend what he was feeling. "Can I?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lily nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She carefully placed their son in Blake's arms, and for the first time in his life, Blake Daniels felt something he could never have anticipated. The raw, overwhelming love for another person that wasn't tied to his wealth, his success, or his empire. The baby's tiny hand gripped Blake's finger, and in that moment, everything changed. The fear that had held him back for so long melted away. The walls he had spent his life building around himself, protecting him from love and vulnerability, began to crumble. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He wasn't just a man who lived for the next deal or the next acquisition. He was a father. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. He looked down at his son, his chest tight with emotion. "I'm here," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Lily's eyes met his, and for the first time in months, there was no anger, no bitterness between them, just an understanding that transcended words. She had seen the man Blake was, distant, afraid, selfish, and now she was seeing the man he could become. Blake held his son close, inhaling the sweet, baby-scented air as if it were the first breath he had ever taken. Everything else in the room, in his life, seemed distant and insignificant now. His empire, his wealth, the parties, the endless business deals, it all seemed like background noise to the moment he was experiencing now. After a few minutes, Blake gently passed the baby back to Lily and took a deep breath. He felt something stir within him, a deep, unshakable conviction. He had made mistakes. He had let fear and pride guide him, had treated Lily like an inconvenience, and had kept his distance when what he should have done was step up. Blake walked to the window, the city skyline stretching out before him, so familiar yet so distant. He looked back at Lily, at their son, and knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "I need to apologize," Blake said, his voice low but firm. Lily looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I've been an idiot," Blake continued. "I thought I could just throw money at everything and make it go away. I thought I could avoid this. Avoid you. But I was wrong. You've done this on your own, and I haven't been there for you. I haven't been the man you deserve." Lily said nothing, but Blake could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes, the flicker of hope that he wasn't beyond redemption. "I promise you, Lily," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll be here for you. For both of you. I'll be the father this child deserves. I'll be the man you deserve." There was silence between them, and for a moment, Blake wondered if his words were enough. But then, to his surprise, Lily nodded. "I believe you," she whispered, "and that's all I need." In that moment, Blake Daniels knew that his life had changed forever. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was one he was ready to walk, because for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. Blake Daniels had built his empire from the ground up. For years, he had been driven by one singular goal: success. Money, power, control. These were the things that mattered to him. He had locked himself in a fortress of wealth and achievement, convinced that if he could only accumulate enough, it would fill the emptiness he'd carried with him for as long as he could remember. But now, standing in the quiet of the hospital room, cradling the baby who was now his responsibility, Blake felt the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself begin to crack. He had spent his entire life running from one thing: vulnerability. Love had always seemed like a dangerous, unpredictable force that could undo everything he had worked so hard to build. As a child, he had learned early on that relationships were fragile, like glass, easily shattered by betrayal or loss. He couldn't afford to let anyone get too close, couldn't afford to care too much. But now, holding his son, looking at Lily, he realized that the very things he had avoided were the things that would bring him true fulfillment. His mind wandered to the past, the years spent buried in boardrooms and business deals, the lavish parties with empty conversations, the fleeting romances that never lasted beyond the sheets. He had always thought that success in business was the ultimate goal. But now, in this small, quiet moment, Blake saw something he had been blind to for years. His legacy wasn't in the high-rise buildings or the multi-million-dollar contracts. It was in his son, in the family he was beginning to build, in the love he was slowly learning to accept. But accepting love wasn't easy for Blake. The fear of being hurt had always held him back. He could build empires, dominate industries, and acquire companies, but when it came to matters of the heart, he had been unprepared, even unwilling, to face the truth. He had spent so long protecting himself from the possibility of pain that he never allowed himself to experience the depth of joy that came with real connection. Now, with Lily and their son, Blake was starting to see that his fears, his need for control, were the things that had held him back from living the life he truly wanted. His achievements felt hollow in comparison to the love he was beginning to feel for them. He no longer wanted to be the man who built an empire only to have it collapse under the weight of his isolation. Blake knew he had to change, and it wasn't going to be easy. His pride, the very thing that had driven him for years, was the same thing that had kept him at a distance from the people who mattered most. He needed to rebuild, not just the trust he had broken with Lily, but the trust he had lost in himself. As he walked into their apartment later that night, Blake saw Lily sitting on the couch, cradling their son. She looked up at him, her expression tired but peaceful. For a moment, Blake simply stood there, watching her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. His journey to this point hadn't been easy, but he was determined to make it right. "I know I've been distant," Blake began, his voice quieter than usual. "And I know I've hurt you. But I want you to know that I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Lily didn't say anything at first. Instead, she simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. Blake wasn't sure if she would ever fully forgive him, but he knew he had to try. He needed to show her that he was willing to do whatever it took to prove his commitment, not just as a father, but as her partner. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," Lily finally said, her voice soft but firm. "But I need to see that you're really here, that you're ready to be the father you promised to be." Blake nodded, feeling a pang of guilt at her words. He knew that he couldn't just show up in their lives when it was convenient. He had to be present, consistently, in ways he had never been before. This wasn't about throwing money at the situation. This was about showing up emotionally, about being vulnerable, about taking responsibility for the love he had always feared. "I will," Blake said, his voice filled with conviction. "I will show you every day that I'm here. I'm ready to build this life with you and our son." It wasn't going to be easy. Blake knew that. He had spent years building his identity around his success, around the belief that he could do everything on his own. But now, as he looked at Lily and their son, he realized that the only thing he had been missing all along was connection. The kind of connection that made life truly worth living. For the first time in his life, Blake Daniels wasn't afraid of the future. He was ready to face it. And it started with the promise he made to Lily, to himself, and to their son. He would rebuild what he had broken, one day at a time. The day Blake Daniels decided to propose to Lily was the day everything shifted in his life. It wasn't the usual grandiose, extravagant affair he was accustomed to. No high-end venues, no gold-plated invitations, no private jets flying in guests from around the world. This time, it was different. This time, the proposal was simple, grounded, and full of meaning, a reflection of the man he had become. Blake stood in the soft golden light of the small park where he and Lily had spent so many quiet afternoons, watching their son play. The place had become sacred to them, a symbol of the life they were building. Far from the world of wealth and excess he once worshipped. He looked down at the small velvet box in his hand and took a steadying breath. He wasn't just proposing to Lily. He was proposing to the future they would share, one built on love, vulnerability, and a commitment to each other that he hadn't known was possible. Lily had no idea what was coming. She was walking ahead, laughing as she gently pushed their son on the swing. The sound of their son's giggles filled the air, a sound Blake had come to cherish deeply. There was a warmth in his chest he could never have imagined even a year ago, a warmth that told him he was exactly where he needed to be. As Lily turned back, Blake felt his heart race. This moment was everything. It wasn't the lavishness of his usual life that brought him satisfaction anymore, but the simplicity of what he was about to ask for. He wanted Lily and their son, not the empire he had spent so many years building. Lily stopped and looked at him with a curious smile. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Blake's throat tightened, and he dropped to one knee in the soft grass. The world seemed to pause, as if everything was aligning in that single moment. "Lily," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "From the moment I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted in life. But I was wrong. I was wrong about so much. You and our son. You've changed me in ways I can't even begin to describe. I want to be the man you believe I can be. I want to be the father our son deserves. And I want to spend the rest of my life making it right, with you by my side. So, Lily Harris, will you marry me?" The breath left her in a soft gasp, her eyes wide as she stared at him, taking in the sincerity in his expression. For a moment, it was as if she couldn't quite process what he had said. The weight of their journey together, everything they had been through, all the struggles, the transformation, hung in the air between them. Lily blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. This wasn't the man she had met months ago, the man who treated their child's birth as a mere inconvenience. This was a man who had faced his fears, his insecurities, and had emerged stronger, ready to step into a role he had long denied. The man kneeling before her now was one who had shown up, who had cared, and most importantly, who had loved. She smiled, the tears in her eyes only adding to the beauty of the moment. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, Blake, I'll marry you." Blake exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A laugh, soft and genuine, escaped him as he slid the ring onto her finger. She was the one who had shown him what true love was, what it meant to be vulnerable and open. And now, as they stood in that park, surrounded by the quiet hum of life, Blake felt like he had finally found what he had spent his entire life searching for. With a gentle pull, he rose and wrapped his arms around her. She leaned into him, and for the first time in a long while, Blake didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He only felt the warmth of the woman he loved and the child they had brought into the world together. "I'm so proud of you, Blake," Lily said, her voice low but filled with emotion. "You've come so far." Blake's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. He had come far indeed, but it was only because of Lily, because of the way she had held him when he was at his lowest, challenged him when he was afraid, and loved him even when he hadn't known how to love himself. As the day wore on and they walked hand in hand back to their car, Blake knew that they were only just beginning. There were challenges ahead, of course. Life would never be perfect. But they had already faced the hardest parts, and now, together, they could take on anything. Their future was theirs to create, and Blake was determined to make sure it was one filled with love, trust, and family. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in the balance of a bank account, but in the bonds we build, the love we share, and the people who stand by us. And as he looked at Lily, his fiancée, and their son, he knew he had everything he needed to begin again. For the first time in his life, Blake felt like he had finally found the one thing that truly mattered, a family built on love and a future that was his to shape. And that, he realized, was the greatest legacy of all. Blake had always been a man who thrived on precision and control. His empire had been built on unwavering discipline, sharp decision-making, and the relentless pursuit of success. But now, as he sat at the kitchen table, his son giggling in the next room and Lily bustling around him, he realized that the game had changed. Family life was messy, unpredictable, and far from the clean-cut, perfect plans he was accustomed to. And yet, he wouldn't have it any other way. The days were filled with a delicate balance of work and family. Blake's schedule had once been a tightly wound clock, dictated by meetings, phone calls, and deals. But now, it felt different, less rigid, more fluid. He had learned to embrace the chaos that came with raising a child, the spontaneity that appeared in the middle of a busy day, and the joy of having both work and family intertwined in his life. Lily, too, had adjusted. She had always been independent, fiercely focused on her career, and yet motherhood had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She could no longer operate in the same way, the same pace she once did. There were sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and days when the weight of everything felt too much. But through it all, Blake was there, just as she was there for him, and together they had found a rhythm, a new normal. Their evenings, once filled with business dinners and networking events, were now spent around their dining table, sharing simple meals, laughing over jokes that only a family could understand. Blake would listen intently to Lily as she recounted her day at the hospital or how their son had managed to color all over the walls with crayons. And Lily would listen as Blake shared his day in the boardroom, his mind still sharp but no longer solely focused on financial success. He had found a new purpose, one that extended beyond the confines of his business ventures. The weekends were their time to reconnect, away from the demands of their careers. They would take walks through the park, pushing the stroller, with their son babbling happily in the seat between them. They would spend lazy afternoons watching movies in the living room, their son nestled between them, completely unaware of the silent bond that had been forged between his parents in the last few months. It wasn't the grand gestures that made their love grow stronger, but the quiet, simple moments, the ones that no amount of wealth could buy. Blake watched Lily as she rocked their son to sleep one evening, the soft hum of a lullaby filling the room. Her gentle touch, the way she comforted him, the way she had always known how to navigate the complexities of motherhood, filled Blake with a sense of awe. He had watched her grow from the woman who was uncertain about their future to the woman who was raising their child with grace and love. And in that moment, he understood. Family wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up every single day, no matter how hard it got. Lily, too, was learning. She had once believed that love was about grand, sweeping gestures. But now, she understood that love was in the small things. It was in Blake's quiet support as she navigated the challenges of parenthood, the way he would step in without hesitation when she needed a break. It was in the moments when Blake would take their son in his arms, whispering words of comfort when he was fussy, or when Lily would find him late at night on the phone, asking how she was doing after a particularly difficult day. Through it all, Blake and Lily had become partners, not just in their love for each other, but in their love for their son. They had learned how to communicate, how to share the burdens of raising a child, and how to lean on each other for support. Their relationship had grown, transformed, and deepened in ways neither of them could have imagined. They had both given up parts of their former lives. Blake had let go of the icy control he'd once maintained, and Lily had made room for a different kind of love, one that was no longer based on independence, but on mutual care and shared responsibilities. Their love had become a steady presence in their lives, one that wasn't shaken by the challenges of parenthood or career pressures. The small moments, bedtime stories, family dinners, and shared laughter had become the foundation of their relationship. They weren't just two people raising a child. They were building a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. And it was in these quiet, intimate moments that Blake truly realized what it meant to be part of a family. Blake and Lily had come so far. Their journey had been anything but easy, but through it all they had learned to navigate the complexities of parenthood and love. And as Blake looked at the family they had created, he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, laughter, and all the messy, wonderful moments that made life truly worth living. Blake Daniels had always been a man of grand plans, his life structured around ambition, wealth, and unyielding focus. He had built his empire with an iron will, a mind that rarely wavered. But as he looked around the house now, with his son's laughter echoing through the rooms and Lily's soft voice humming as she prepared dinner in the kitchen, he realized that everything he had once believed about life had changed. The years of isolation, the distractions of power and prestige, had all melted away in the warmth of this small, cozy home they had created together. His life was no longer defined by boardrooms, jet-setting, or endless meetings. Instead, it was filled with the unpredictable joys of fatherhood, the quiet moments of connection with Lily, and the sense of responsibility that came with being a partner, a father, and a man who had finally found peace. Their son, now a curious toddler with bright eyes and a smile that could light up the entire room, had become the center of their world. He had woven himself into the very fabric of their lives, bringing them closer together as a family. Blake marveled at how effortlessly Lily navigated the challenges of motherhood, how she could balance work, household duties, and her nurturing spirit with a grace that left him in awe. Watching her with their son, Blake couldn't help but feel the depth of the love that had grown between them. Something real, something unwavering. They had become a team in every sense of the word. Blake, who had once been so consumed by his empire, now made it a priority to be present. His meetings were still important, but they no longer came at the cost of his family. He had learned to balance his work life with his personal life, and more importantly, he had learned how to truly be there for Lily and their son. Whether it was late-night feedings, bedtime stories, or simply enjoying a quiet evening together, Blake was there, fully present, fully engaged in their lives. Lily, too, had transformed in ways Blake had never anticipated. She had always been independent, but now there was an ease in her presence, a calm that radiated from her as she embraced their new life together. They both worked hard to ensure that their family was cared for, but they also made time for one another. Date nights, though simple, became a cherished tradition, an opportunity to reconnect, laugh, and remind themselves of the love that had started it all. As they sat together one evening, watching their son build towers with his blocks, Blake felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had once thought love was a distraction, something to be avoided at all costs. But now, as he looked at the family they had built, he understood that love wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was the foundation of everything that mattered. Blake reflected on how far he had come, from the guarded, emotionally distant billionaire who had treated love as a weakness to the man who now felt a deep, unshakable bond with his family. He had learned that love wasn't just about passion or romance, it was about showing up, about being there in the small, everyday moments. It was in the laughter they shared, in the quiet comfort of holding hands, and in the unspoken understanding that they were in this together. His past mistakes no longer weighed him down. Blake had learned to forgive himself for the missteps, for the times he had pulled away from Lily, for the moments he had let fear dictate his actions. He had made a commitment to their family, and that commitment was stronger than any business deal, any fortune, or any legacy. It was a promise to be the father his son deserved, the partner Lily needed, and the man he wanted to be. As their son toddled over, his arms outstretched for a hug, Blake scooped him up, holding him close. His son's giggle filled the room, and Blake felt a rush of love that made everything else seem insignificant. This was what mattered. Family, love, connection. And as he looked at Lily, smiling at him from across the room, Blake realized that their future was as bright as the laughter that echoed in their home. They had built something real, a family, a life, and a love that was unshakable. There was still so much to do, so many dreams to chase, but for the first time in his life, Blake knew that the path ahead was the one he wanted to walk. The journey had been unpredictable, filled with challenges and unexpected turns, but it had led him here, to this moment of clarity. There was no more uncertainty. The future was theirs to build together. And with that, Blake understood. The true measure of his success wasn't in his empire. It was in the love he shared with Lily and their son. That, more than anything, was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. A family, a love, a future. It was the beginning of everything. Thanks for sticking to the end. Don't forget to subscribe.